welcome back to the Bullpen Podcast, where we spotlight the leaders, strategies, and stories driving real business success. Today, we're diving into a topic that's every ambitious professional and business owner should care about: protecting your legacy and avoiding costly legal pitfalls. Our guest is Andrew Ayers, an estate planning and business law attorney who has built his firm around making legal planning simple, clear, and tailored to real life. Whether you're thinking about your family's future, your business security, or both, Andrew has the insights to help you put the right protections in place. Now, let's step into the bullpen with Andrew Ayers. Andrew, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
From the very start, what inspires you to start your own law firm focused on estate planning and business?
Well, before doing estate planning and business law, I'd worked for another law firm, and we were mainly doing family law, and I saw that my clients had needs beyond just a divorce or a custody battle. A lot of it was that post breakup planning that was needed. Some of them owned businesses with their spouses. Others just didn't have a plan going forward. And I remember speaking to my boss that, we should be looking into this as well. I think this is kind of part of the whole package. He was only interested in the family law piece. And what really motivated me to start my own firm in the end was my daughter was born. And about 9 months later, it was, becoming clear that if I stayed where I wasn't going to have the time to spend with her that I really wanted to. And I went and started my own firm and had a bunch of clients reach out and said, great, you're on your own now. We had these other needs that you couldn't help me with before, so let's get to work on them now.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, kind of having that combo piece is really important. And obviously, a lot of business owners and families feel really overwhelmed by legal planning. How do you make that process feel less intimidating for your clients?
Well, I like to think I'm relatively approachable and pretty easy to talk to. And I think that's part of, the background in family law as well. I was dealing with people who were going through a pretty tough time, and it's the importance of being able to listen. And so I think with my clients, what we want to make sure is they understand the process, they understand the documents. I think one of the biggest challenges people have is saying the words, "I don't know." So especially when you're working with a client who's well educated, especially if they're a doctor, a college professor, they're an accountant, name it. They have an MBA. They're really smart, but they're afraid to say, "I don't know what that document means," or "I don't know what that clause in my will means." Or if I'm a doctor and I'm running a business, maybe I have an operating agreement, but I never really read through it. I'm not sure what it really says. So getting them to feel comfortable with, I really need to understand what I'm signing. I need to understand what's been put in front of me. And that, when you're working with me, it's safe to say, "I don't know," so we can make sure we get you educated on that.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to being able to say, "I don't know," some people might already have even other different kind of approaches to what they think is being interpreted in their documents. And I guess in your experience, what's really that biggest misconception that people have about estate planning?
I think the biggest misconception is that it's only for rich people. A lot of people will say, I just got married. My wife and I have a couple of young kids. We're not far enough along in life that we need an estate plan. But in reality, once you have children, when we have any children under 18, we want an estate plan in place, because otherwise, if something happens to you and your spouse, then where your children are going to be living after you're gone, who's going to be raising them, that's going to be up to your local court. So a will at least let you say, "Here's who I want to raise my children." And if you're a parent, and I've got 3 kids under 18, that's definitely a prime motivator to make sure that that decision is not being left to some judge who doesn't know you, doesn't know anything about your family, and is just going to be looking at pieces of paper to try to decide where your kids are going to spend the next few years of their life.
Yeah, and obviously touching a little bit on the needs for families and for your kids and everything like that, but the combo platter between families and business owners, where do those needs overlap between families and business owners, and how do they differ too?
I think that they tend to be pretty similar in that you have business owners who've really focused on building their business and they spend a lot of time. If they've recently launched, we still have very much a hustle culture of I'm here, 12, 15, 16, 17 hours a day working really hard on my business. And they put a lot in the business plan. But what about their family at home? That business is supporting a household with a spouse, a couple of kids. And we often find that we have no planning on the personal side, no estate plan, powers of attorney, healthcare directives. But then we also find in the business that a lot of times people just set up their business. Maybe they used a website and got going and never created the full legal foundation. And I totally get it. I mean, lawyers are usually pretty low on the list of people you want to speak to and people that you want to pay. And that's fine. That's what the lawyer is in this process. But you still need to have that discussion at the beginning to figure out when it's important to bring the lawyer in. And so for me, the overlap is we're at that point. We have a growing business. Let's get a plan in place for the business. Let's get a plan in place for your family so that we have everybody protected. It doesn't have to be big and complex, but let's just get that foundation in place. And then as you continue to grow, maybe we'll look at some more advanced techniques.
Yeah, you mentioned that foundation. For someone just starting that first business, what do you think is the most important legal foundation they need to put in place?
The most important will be, it depends upon the type of business you form. So if it's an LLC, it's an operating agreement. If it's other corporations, it could be a bylaw, it could be a shareholder agreement, depending upon what your state calls those documents. But so really it's the operating document for your business. And really it's going to explain the basics of the business, who the owners are, what happens if something happens to an owner, are we choosing a specific tax classification? People think it has to be some big, long 50, 60, 70 page document. But for a single member business, it's often just like 8 to 15 pages. But we want to make sure that the basics are in there because that's really what provides you with that liability protection that most people are looking for when they create a business.
And I guess on the flip side, to the personal side, one thing I think of typically when I think of a kind of a foundation from a personal side, from estate planning, wills. Let's talk about wills a little bit. Why do so many people put off creating one, and what's really at stake if they never do?
I'm not always sure why people put it off. Some common questions I get is, it costs too much, or I'm not ready for a will, or do I really need one because I'm not married or I don't have children. So people come up with a million excuses. And I think a lot of it comes down to thinking about death is a really hard thing to think about. There's very few people who come into my office and are excited to talk about what happens after you've passed away. So I think mentally that's a huge roadblock for all of us. And I think that when we get past that roadblock, we want to see that will in place, as we were saying before, especially for when we have children under the age of 18. Even if you don't have a spouse, we want to make sure we have other documents. So in addition to a will, when we're looking at an estate plan, we often have powers of attorney and a healthcare directive. And so what those will do is while you're still alive, if something happens to you and you're unable to speak for yourself, we know the right person to make medical decisions. We know the right person who can manage your finances. And especially in the hospital, if you're not married, the doctor doesn't know who to talk to. Are they supposed to talk to your brother? Are they supposed to talk to your parents? The doctor doesn't know if you're estranged from your parents or if a cousin shows up and says, I'm the next of kin. So especially for people who are not married, we want to make sure that we have these kinds of documents in place so that the people know who's the right person to talk to for that particular situation.
Got it. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier too, just about kind of being an approachable person, being able to listen, being able to simplify things. But on top of all that stuff, I mean, how do you explain complicated legal documents in a way that helps your clients feel confident instead of more confused?
I mean, I just try to break it down as best I can. If a document's 30 pages long, that's intimidating, but we can usually, piece it out. When I work with clients, whether it's on the business or personal side, we usually provide a summary. So if you're doing a will or a trust, there's a summary document that goes with it. That's really just like a high level overview. Especially if you're a business owner, you're probably used to executive summaries when you're working in your business. So you can think of that summary for a will or trust as really like an executive summary for your estate plan. And then when we're doing an operating agreement or a shareholders agreement, we also try to provide the same thing. We try to give some kind of a summary of the document. So you can start with, here's the layout of the document. I know I want to focus on Article 4 because I'm not really sure what that means. And we'll dig into it. And, unfortunately, legal terms are pretty obtuse at times. And so there can be some significant amount of time that needs to be spent with people to get through some of the big words. Some of them are still pulled from Latin. And we just have to make sure we understand what they really mean and what the implications are of having them in your documents.
Yeah, and kind of talking about a lot of different kind of aspects of those documents and those large scale things that you need to explain. What role does estate planning play in protecting a business owner's legacy, not just their family?
Well, it's usually going to protect their business. So especially when you're a single member business and you're the only one running it, if something happens to you and we don't have any estate planning in place, then your business has to go through your local probate court, which means now you have to involve a judge to be the person to either wind down the business, sell it off to a partner, sell it off to a third party. And if you think the court system is going to do that quickly, I've got really bad news for you. It was bad even before the COVID pandemic, and it's gotten a lot worse. So your business won't be able to move quickly. Transactions won't necessarily be able to happen. So that estate plan, those succession documents are important so that the business can operate smoothly if something happens to you, especially when you have specific goals. So if you know that that business is there and you want it to keep running and you want your right-hand person to take over for you and the income can still be paid to your family, that's just not going to automatically happen if you pass away and there's nothing in writing. So we want to make sure we have that plan in place, and we want to keep it out of the probate court wherever we can so that we can protect your family and that income stream. Because the other thing about the probate court is that's going to be expensive because lawyers are going to get involved. There's going to be court proceedings. There's going to be court filings. And so a lot of your legacy that you built in the business may then get eaten up by the probate court fees.
Yeah, now this one too, a little bit interesting of a question here for you, but obviously without any client confidentiality concerns or anything, and giving any specific details, but any real world examples that you could share that, like how the proper planning that you've experienced that really helped save a family or business from some major issues down the road?
Sure. So on the family side, and this is something anybody listening to this podcast can do, and I encourage you to do, and that's going to be check your beneficiary designations. So one of the most common things I see is that you have a life insurance policy, you have your retirement accounts, they all should have beneficiaries on them, but you forget to check something. And the default then becomes to my estate. And normally that's not a problem when we have smaller assets, but we're here in Minnesota. We have an estate tax that kicks in at $3 million. So let's say you have a $5 million life insurance policy and then a retirement account and some other accounts, and they all have to go into your estate now. That's going to trigger an estate tax problem for you. So that money above $3 million is going to be taxed before it gets to your family. Whereas if we use a direct beneficiary, we're not going to run into that same situation. So we want to make sure that where we can, we use beneficiary designations. And it's not even a client confidentiality issue, but my wife and I went through this with the company that administers her IRA. So when she switched jobs, she opened a new IRA. I was on the phone with them. We gave them my information, my social security number, my date of birth. And then about a week later, we got a letter in the mail from them saying, congrats on your new account. And here's the information. And the beneficiary was left blank. We said, wait a second, we were on the phone. I gave you all that information, and we had to call back and do it again. And then we finally got the letter that confirmed that I was the beneficiary on the account. And another issue we had in my personal life as well. So my mother passed away. A very similar thing happened. Again, a financial institution I won't name, but my parents had a trust. Everything was planned out, and they found one account that the beneficiary designation wasn't on there. So my father had to open a small probate estate in a different state just to be able to distribute a very small amount of money. Now, my father is meticulous when it comes to paperwork, so there's no way that he missed this, and it was clearly on the financial side. But that's just like a little pebble you don't have to trip over. And on the business side, if you're running a business and you hope to get investors or you hope to bring on partners down the road, if you don't have your documents in place, if you don't have an operating or a shareholders agreement, you're going to get a lot less. You're going to get a significant discount on what people are willing to invest because they want to see that your business is properly formed, it's well run, they want to see standard operating procedures, they want to see systems. We want all of this documented, and that's when you get full value out of your business from either a sale or an investment. If it really just looks like you're running it out of your side bedroom, we don't have any documents, you can still sell it, but you're going to sell it at a significant discount.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it a little bit here, and we talked about it, I think even with wills earlier too, but business owners often think, oh, I'll get around to it with legal planning later. What's your message to them about timing?
Later may be the right time, but speak to a professional first and find out when that right time is. When you're setting up your business, I totally get it. And I've been a part of a few masterminds over the years, and one message that always resonated with me when I got started was, what's the best use of your next dollar? And I will happily admit to business owners that the best use of the next dollar is not always spent on an attorney. But at some point, that attorney is the best use of your next dollar. So you may form your company this week. You may have other things ahead of you, getting websites set up, getting other marketing together. However, let's check back in a month or two and see, okay, now that we've got some income coming in, let's get the foundation set up. Let's get it all put together. So states like Minnesota don't require you to have an operating agreement signed within a certain period. However, I also am licensed in New York, which is an example of where if you form an LLC, you are required to actually have an operating agreement signed within 90 days of formation. So when you're talking to me for a New York client, we have a little more urgency there because we have an LLC, that we have requirements that we have to get it published and we have to get an operating agreement signed within a certain period. But for most other businesses, let's look at where that next dollar is best spent. And it might not be on the operating agreement. That next dollar might be on your contract. Say, okay, we're up and running. We've been just running on invoices. Things have been fine, but we're starting to see some headaches. So maybe now's the time to really clean up the contracts. And these are really advice for single member businesses. If you have more than one person owning the business, that shareholders agreement, that needs to be upfront. Because if you don't have anything in place and you and your best friend have a falling out over a small decision, you've now bought yourself a lawsuit that's very expensive, very time consuming, and can take years to resolve. So if it's just you running your business, you might have a little more runway before you need to bring the lawyers in. But if you have partners, that operating or shareholders agreement should really be one of your first priorities when you get set up.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you just mentioned one of those, like a potential risk that I'm about to talk about here. But obviously, many entrepreneurs are pretty DIY minded. They move fast. But what are some of the risks of cutting corners with contracts or any legal documents?
I think the biggest risk is you're missing important provisions. So I had somebody a few weeks ago who set up their own LLC and then they used ChatGPT to create an operating agreement. And he said, can I send it over for you to look at? Because he was going to hire me to review it and then revise it. It was 3 pages long, and one of the pages was the table of contents. And, your operating agreement needs to be more than 2 pages. It was missing most of the provisions. But if you're using ChatGPT, it spits it out and says, great, here's your operating agreement. This is what you need for your LLC. You don't know what's missing. In addition, if you use websites that will just fill your information in, they have a very set template of just their specific issues that they think most businesses run into. But chances are your business is going to be a little unique to you. And we want to make sure that we have unique provisions that are tailored to your business. So for example, if you were going to have an estate plan with a trust and you wanted the trust to own your membership interest in your business, that's not something you're going to find as a standard provision online. You're going to want to work with a professional who can make sure that your operating agreement and your estate plan match up. If you want to have a succession plan of what happens if you become sick or if you pass away, there's a really generic version on the web that doesn't keep your business out of probate court. You still end up getting stuck and going in front of that judge. So you want to, again, work with a professional who understands what that provision needs to say. So in Minnesota, for example, you can actually have a transfer on death designation. So it's like a beneficiary for your business so that if you pass away, the business directly goes to somebody else. Well, that's not in your standard operating agreement. And it's definitely not in what the websites are going to give you because they don't do that in every state. So what they want to give you is a really basic template that would work in any of the 50 states. But you're a Minnesota business. We have specific things we can do in this state, and we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of all of those. Like when I have people bring in businesses from other states and we domesticate them here in Minnesota, that's the first thing we do. Let's check your old operating agreement from the state of New Jersey, for example, and let's make updates so you can take advantage of what Minnesota has to offer. So there's no reason to miss out on those advantages because you just wanted to use a form-filling website.
Got it. And obviously we've covered a lot here, and someone listening here, feels stuck or overwhelmed. What do you think is the very first step they should take to begin protecting their family and or business?
I mean, I would always say you can reach out to me. We can set up a call and chat about it, or reach out to your local professional. If you have an accountant for your business and it's an accounting question, reach out to them. And maybe your accountant works with a business lawyer as well who could speak to you about that. But definitely don't be afraid to reach out and speak to a professional to make sure you get a plan in place. So I often have calls with people who were not moving forward right away, but we're creating a next step plan for them. So again, they've created their business. It's a single member LLC. They're not ready to really invest in the legal paperwork they need, but they want to at least have that plan for what are those next steps. So where's that next dollar going? So I think the most important thing is to speak to a professional and understand what is the plan. So just, keep running without anything in place is kind of dangerous because you're not sure what bumps may come in the road. So at least have that consultation with somebody to have an idea of what you should be doing next.
All right. And obviously looking ahead, down the road, what legal trends do you see impacting business owners and families over the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, I think across the board, there's a lot of technology that's going to be impacting us, whether it's going to be AI, whether it's digital assets, whether it's cryptocurrency. The online world is really evolving. And the reality that most people need to understand about the law is that the law moves very slow. It's not as fast as society. Society will move on to online documents years before the law ever has. So now in Minnesota, as of last year, we're allowed to start doing electronic wills, but my clients haven't been interested in it. They're still interested in the old school. They want that piece of paper because not a lot of people are familiar with that system yet. And the law is still catching up to where society goes. So you're going to see a lot of changes in tech, whether it's business, whether it's on the estate planning side. So on the business side, we have a lot more of our assets online. So we have to worry about cybersecurity. How are we protecting customer data? There's so many data breaches. I don't know about your email, but I think I get like an email or two a week that my information's been exposed by somebody this week in some kind of a data breach. So I think for businesses, understanding that when you're working with clients, they're going to be giving you this very private information and you're going to need to have systems in place. You're going to have policies and you're going to have a plan for when that breach comes. And I would love to tell you that it's if the breach comes, but I think the reality is it's when the data breach hits your company. Do you have a plan in place? And that's one of the things I work with my business clients on is I have a set of referrals I can give them. If you're looking for cybersecurity insurance, you can talk to this guy. If you need the software to protect your system, you can talk to this guy. So we want to make sure that we have that network of people to work with. And I think especially on the cybersecurity side for businesses, that's an important piece that they need to be considering.
Awesome. Yeah. And one last question here for you, Andrew, in the bullpen. Just on a personal note, what's one mindset or practice you've used in building your own firm that you think other entrepreneurs could apply?
I think making sure that you're being authentic with the people you work with. So for me, it's a matter of, my clients all get birthday cards. We have a book giveaway. We have a variety of ways we stay in touch with my clients over the year. And that's very much a message that I take from my mother growing up. We always had our address book that listed everybody's birthdays. And, my mother would always make sure that we sent a birthday card to whoever's birthday was coming up. She was also a librarian, which is why you can see over my shoulder, I have a bunch of books and you'd be shocked if you saw all the other books under my desk and everywhere else. We have piles of them everywhere. And so I think being authentic to who you are and making sure that your customers and the people you interact with understand that. So anybody who knows me probably knows the importance that books and a library and education have in my life, both personally and professionally. And I like to make sure that the people I interact with understand that piece as well. Because when you're trying to fake being somebody else, you can do it for a while, but it will catch up with you at some point. And if you're working with clients, if you're working with customers, when that catches up with you, you're not going to like the way that all plays out. So if you're running a business, be true to who you are and make sure you share that with your clients, because the reality is there are clients out there who will love you for who you are, but they will hate you if you try to be somebody who you're not.
Exactly. That's great advice there, Andrew. That's a wrap on today's episode of the Bullpen Podcast. Huge thank you to Andrew Ayers for breaking down estate planning and business law in a way that's both practical and approachable. If you're a business owner or a family leader, don't wait until it's too late. Start planning now to protect what matters most. If you'd enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, share this episode with a fellow business leader, and leave us a review. And until next time, thanks for listening to the Bullpen.